September 27, 1956. 65,000 feet over the Mojave Desert. Inside a 52-foot rocket plane the color of gunmetal, a needle crosses a number no human being has ever reached under their own control. Mach 3.196, 2,094 miles an hour, 3 times the speed of sound. On the ground at Edwards Air Force Base, engineers watching the telemetry trace start to cheer. 11 minutes later, Captain Mel Apt is dead, and the aircraft that just made history is scattered across the desert floor in pieces small enough to fit in a hand. This is the story of those 11 minutes. Every one of them is on the record, because the airplane that killed him was still transmitting when it happened. Here's the detail to hold on to before anything else. This was not Mel Apt's 10th flight in this aircraft, or his 5th. It was his first. The very first time he flew the Bell X-2 under its own power was the flight that killed him, and it was also the flight that made him, for a few minutes, the fastest human being who had ever lived. Everyone who signed off on that flight plan had good reasons for it. Nobody involved thought they were sending him up unprepared. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that decision made sense on paper, on a strict schedule, with a strict deadline, and exactly what the gap between made sense on paper and survived contact with reality actually cost. 3 years earlier, Chuck Yeager's Bell X-1 had already broken the sound barrier, and the Air Force wanted the next number. Mach 3, in altitudes above 100,000 feet, into air so thin a wing barely works and a jet engine won't run at all. Only a rocket could get there. Bell built 2 X-2s to do it, the Starbuster. A machine designed to be carried aloft under the wing of a converted B-50 bomber, dropped from over 30,000 feet like a bomb, and lit like one. An engine burning a mix of alcohol and liquid oxygen that could gulp its entire fuel load in about 3 minutes and leave the pilot gliding home on whatever altitude he had left. Because that fuel burns so fast, an X-2 flight is a strange shape. A long, quiet climb under the mothership's wing, 3 violent minutes of full power, and then a long, silent glide home with an engine that no longer works. There is no going around for another try. Every landing is the only landing you get. The program had earned its reputation the hard way, long before Mel Apt was ever assigned to it. In 1953, the first X-2 exploded in midair during a routine fuel test over Lake Ontario. A leather gasket, chemically treated, that turned out to react violently with liquid oxygen under vibration. It killed Bell's chief test pilot and a technician outright, and blew the B-50 carrying them 100 feet straight up. It took 2 more years and 2 more exploding rocket planes from the same family before engineers finally proved the cause by dipping a scrap of the same leather in liquid oxygen and striking it with a hammer in a lab, and very nearly losing an arm confirming it. By the time the surviving X-2 finally flew under rocket power, 6 weeks before the Air Force's own deadline to cancel the whole program, this aircraft was already 9 years old and had already killed 2 men without leaving the ground. Frank Everest flew it first and quietly held the unofficial world speed record at Mach 2.87 before handing the program to a new pair of pilots. Ivan Kinchelow took it to 126,000 feet on September 7, 1956, a world altitude record that would stand until the X-15. 2 new test pilots, still learning an aircraft that had already killed people, even when nobody was aboard. The last number left on the table was speed, Mach 3. For a machine already 9 years behind schedule, on borrowed time, that number was the whole reason the program still existed. The one result that would let everyone involved say the losses had bought something. Mel Apt was chosen to get it. 31 years old, a decorated Korean War flight test veteran, father of 2, one of the most respected test pilots at Edwards, and a man who had never once sat in the cockpit of the aircraft he was about to fly at 3 times the speed of sound. He had trained for months in an Iron Bird simulator so accurate that engineers trusted it completely to prepare him. What no simulator on Earth could reproduce was inertia. What a real 52-foot airframe, full of fuel and momentum, actually does when it is thrown around a real sky at a real 3,000 miles an hour. That gap between what the simulator could teach him and what the machine would actually do is where the next 10 minutes live. T-0. Over 30,000 feet above the Mojave, the B-50's bomb bay doors open and the X-2 falls free. For a few seconds, it's just a glider, over 20,000 pounds of airplane with almost nothing yet to hold it up, nose pitching down into the drop. Then Apt lights the rocket motor and the aircraft stops falling and starts climbing. The acceleration is not like anything built before it. In under 3 minutes of burn, the X-2 will pass through speeds that took the entire X-1 program years to approach 1 Mach number at a time. Apt pulls the nose up into a steep climb, trading the rocket's thrust for altitude and speed at once, exactly as the flight plan calls for. Watching a Mach meter that is about to run out of numbers to show him. 40,000 feet, 50,000, 60. The sky outside the canopy is already going from blue to violet, high enough that the curve of the Earth is starting to show, and the aircraft is still climbing, still accelerating, still exactly on profile. And then it happens. Mach 3.196, 2,094 miles an hour, 13 miles above the Mojave, faster than any human being had ever traveled under their own control. For a few seconds, this is the best moment of Milburn Apt's career. 9 years of an aircraft trying to kill its own ground crews before it ever carried a pilot. A program 6 weeks from cancellation when it finally flew. And here, finally, is the number everyone came for. On the ground, engineers watching the telemetry trace start to cheer, exactly as they will again in the cold open of this video. The rocket motor burns out on schedule. It's 3 minutes of fuel spent. The X-2 is now a 52-foot glider, unpowered, at the edge of space, with one job left: get back down to a dry lake bed and land on it. There is no throttle to open again if this goes wrong. Nothing about that job has gone wrong yet. This is where the real time starts to matter, because everything from here happens fast, and every second of it is still in front of Apt, not behind him. He noses the X-2 over and starts down, trading the last of his altitude for the distance back to Rogers Dry Lake, the vast, flat, sun-baked mudflat that has served as an emergency runway for every rocket plane flown out of Edwards, precisely because an aircraft with no engine and one shot at landing needs more room for error than any paved strip can offer. Somewhere in this descent, at a speed and an altitude nobody had put a test pilot through before, in an aircraft he had never flown until this exact flight, Apt does the arithmetic pilots do 1,000 times on ordinary landings and gets it wrong. He's coming in too fast, too high, going to overshoot the lake bed entirely. On its own, this is an ordinary mistake. Edwards was built around exactly this kind of margin for error. A whole network of dry lake beds spread across the desert floor, Rogers, Rosamond, and others besides, precisely because engine-out research aircraft needed somewhere forgiving to aim for when the arithmetic went wrong. On an ordinary aircraft at an ordinary speed, an overshoot like this fixes itself with a shallow turn and a longer approach. A few seconds of correction, nothing more. The kind of adjustment a pilot makes without even thinking about it as a decision. The X-2, still carrying a huge amount of residual speed at an altitude where the air is too thin to argue back, was not an ordinary aircraft, and this was not an ordinary moment to be finding that out for the first time. Apt banks the X-2 to bring it back around for a different approach to the lakebed. To understand what happens next, you need one piece of engineering most pilots of the era had never had to think about. A conventional aircraft carries most of its weight spread along a long wing, which resists rolling the way a tightrope walker's pole resists tipping. The X-2 was built almost the opposite one. A dense, heavy, needle-shaped fuselage, packed with fuel tanks and a rocket motor, attached to a small, stubby wing built for speed, not lift. Almost all of its mass sat close to the centerline. That shape makes an aircraft roll far faster than it can pitch or yaw. And if a pilot rolls hard while also asking for even a small correction in pitch or yaw at the same moment, the three motions can lock together and reinforce each other instead of staying separate. Engineers were only just beginning to name this problem in 1956. They called it inertia coupling. At the speed and residual momentum Apt was still carrying, his banking turn asked the airframe to do exactly that. Roll, pitch, and yaw all at once, hard, faster than a pilot's hands or a set of control surfaces sized for a calmer flight regime could ever correct for. The X-2 stops behaving like an airplane. It starts to tumble, end over end, out of control, the horizon spinning past the cockpit glass in a direction no pilot training of the era prepares you for. Inside that tumble, everything a pilot normally relies on stops working at once. The instruments are spinning too fast to read. The horizon is no longer a fixed line outside the canopy, but a blur going past in every direction. And the tumbling itself generates forces that press a human body in directions it was never built to resist for long. Forces that don't just make it hard to move an arm toward a switch, but can start shutting down blood flow to the brain within seconds. A research aircraft built specifically to help engineers understand the outer edge of controlled flight has just flown straight into the exact instability it existed to study, discovering it in real time, with a man strapped inside it, who now has only a few seconds left to act before his body stops being able to. The X-2's designers had seen a version of this coming. Not this exact failure, but the general problem of losing control at a speed and altitude too extreme for an ordinary bailout, where simply opening a canopy into a Mach 3 wind stream would kill a pilot before he ever cleared the aircraft. Their answer was not an ejection seat. It was the entire nose of the aircraft, a sealed capsule built to separate from the fuselage as one piece, tumble clear of the wreckage under its own stability, and only then, once it had slowed to something survivable, let the pilot open the hatch, climb out, and parachute the rest of the way down on his own. Apt gets it done. In the middle of a violent, disorienting tumble, fighting forces that were already trying to tear his hands off the controls, he finds and activates the separation handle, and the system works exactly as designed. The capsule breaks cleanly away from the dying airframe. By any reasonable measure, this is a successful emergency escape. Apt is alive, sealed inside a capsule that has done precisely what 9 years of engineering built it to do. But the capsule's own parachute was never built to bring it all the way to the ground. That had been a deliberate weight trade-off years earlier. A chute large enough for a full soft landing would have made the capsule too heavy to separate cleanly at speed. Instead, the parachute was sized only to stabilize the tumbling and slow the capsule down to a point where the pilot could safely open the hatch and jump clear with his own personal parachute, exactly the way the escape sequence had been designed and drilled. That window opens, and nothing happens. No hatch, no second parachute, no pilot climbing free. The most likely explanation, pieced together afterward from what the wreckage and the telemetry could show, is the simplest and the cruelest one. The tumble, violent enough to force Apt into activating the capsule in the first place, had already subjected him to G-forces strong enough to knock him unconscious before separation, or in the seconds immediately after it. The capsule had done its job. The man inside it never had the chance to do his. Falling under a parachute that was only ever meant to slow it, not stop it, the capsule strikes the desert floor at roughly 120 miles an hour. It's over instantly. 11 minutes after the fastest flight in human history, ground crews reach the wreckage and find Milburn Apt still sealed inside the one piece of the X-2 engineered to save his life. A system that worked perfectly right up until the one step it was never designed to complete on its own. Program investigators asked the obvious question afterward, and it doesn't have a comfortable answer. Why was a man sent to fly this specific aircraft at this specific speed for the very first time in his life? The honest answer is that nobody at Edwards had a better option, and everybody involved knew it. The X-2 was too dangerous, too expensive, and too far behind schedule to spend flights easing a new pilot into it gently, one Mach number at a time. Every flight that was authorized had to be a flight that produced a record, or the program with the December deadline hanging over it would simply be canceled with nothing to show. There was no slack built in for anything gentler, and inertia coupling itself was not yet understood well enough, in 1956, to train a pilot around it in advance. In a very real sense, Apt's flight was also the experiment that finally proved, at full scale and at full cost, exactly how dangerous that gap in understanding was. That criticism hadn't come from nowhere. For months before the crash, the civilian research agency overseeing the program had been formally warning that the Air Force was chasing speed and altitude records ahead of safety and usable engineering data, and being overruled. After Apt's death, those same engineers were reluctant to let their people fly the next rocket plane in line, the X-15, for exactly the same reason. That reluctance won. The X-15 that replaced the X-2 was flown by test pilots who logged years in simulators before their first live flight, following an incremental, envelope-expanded, one careful step at a time approach that the X-2 program was never given the time or the budget to use. It is not a coincidence that the X-15, a far faster and far more dangerous aircraft on paper, killed only one pilot in 10 years of flight testing. Somebody, finally, had done the arithmetic Apt's flight had written in the sky. If stories like this, one machine, one flight, told in real time, are what you come here for, subscribe. This channel runs on exactly this kind of story. Milburn Apt left behind a wife and 2 young children, and a reputation built over a decade of test flying and a tour of combat in Korea as one of the steadiest pilots at Edwards. The Air Force kept the entire X-2 speed program classified for a while after the crash, officially to protect a Mach 3 achievement from Soviet eyes, but also, less officially, because a growing number of people inside the program had already started asking whether this specific loss had been necessary at all. There is no version of this story where that trade-off looks clean. A test pilot corps that size, in that era, understood the risk better than almost anyone alive, and flew anyway because someone had to, and because the alternative was a 9-year program that ended with nothing to show for either of the men it had already cost. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. The flight envelope data Apt's aircraft radioed back before it broke apart didn't die with him. It fed directly into the design of everything that followed it. The X-15 would eventually go faster and higher than the X-2 ever did, reaching speeds and altitudes that make Apt's Mach 3.196 look almost modest by comparison, but only because its engineers finally had a complete real map of exactly where the X-2's edge of control had been and exactly what it cost to find it. That map was paid for in the most direct way an engineering program can pay for anything. Kincheloh's altitude record from 3 weeks earlier stood only until the X-15 broke it. Apt's speed record stood for years. The aircraft that set it flew exactly once under its own power with him at the controls, and never flew again. Saw you? A single complete flight from drop to record to wreckage that took less than 20 minutes from beginning to end. 2 rocket planes, 2 fatal accidents, a 9-year program that existed to answer one question: how fast and how high could a person survive going? And answered it in the most literal way an engineering program ever can. 9 years after Mel Apt's last flight, at the same desert base, a different research aircraft would tumble out of control on approach to that exact same dry lake bed. 16 seconds of footage that ended up, of all places, in the opening titles of a television show, watched by more people than ever learned Milburn Apt's name. That story and those 16 seconds are next on Tech and Flow.